Was Jesus really born in Bethlehem? To discover the answer, we need to carefully walk through the world of the Bible, explore the history of ancient Israel, and look at what early Christians believed. Let's take our time as we explore this story, step by step, connecting each piece so it builds naturally and gently, making it easy for kids and adults alike to understand. Our journey begins in a small, peaceful place called Bethlehem. It wasn't large or noisy like today's big cities. There were no tall buildings, no flashing signs, and no busy streets. Instead, Bethlehem was calm, a simple town nestled among rolling hills. Travelers who approached it in ancient times would have seen clusters of small houses built from stone, animals grazing on the nearby fields, and families going about their daily tasks. But what made this quiet town special, even before Jesus' birth, was its deep connection to Israel's greatest king, King David. David, the brave shepherd who became a mighty king, grew up in Bethlehem. Because of him, Bethlehem gained the title City of David. For the Jewish people, this made the town more than just a dot on the map. It was a symbol of hope and promise. Many believed that the Messiah, the special Savior God would one day send, would come from David's family. And since David's roots were in Bethlehem, people kept their eyes on that little town. When we turn to the Bible, we find that both Matthew and Luke, and two of the Gospel writers, give us details about Jesus' birth. Even though they tell the story differently, both agree on one important point. Jesus was born in Bethlehem, but each writer gives us information in their own way, and when we connect those details, a beautiful picture begins to form. Matthew tells us about wise men called Magi, who traveled from faraway lands because they had seen a bright and unusual star. They believed this star was announcing the birth of a powerful new king. When they arrived in Jerusalem, they asked King Herod where they could find this child. Herod, confused and worried, called his priests and teachers to look through the ancient scriptures. They found the prophecy that said the Messiah would come from Bethlehem. This shows us that even in Jesus' time, people already believed Bethlehem was the chosen birthplace. Luke gives us another important piece of the story. He explains that Joseph and Mary were living in Nazareth when a Roman census was announced. A census is when the government counts all the people so they can collect taxes and keep records. This census required Joseph to travel to Bethlehem because he belonged to the family line of King David. This journey from Nazareth to Bethlehem was long and difficult, about 70 miles on rough, dusty paths. Mary, who was expecting a baby, traveled with him. When they finally reached Bethlehem, the town was full of visitors who had also come for the census. With no guest room available, Mary and Joseph settled in a quiet place where animals were kept. And that is where Jesus was born. This detail doesn't just tell us where Jesus was born, it shows us how humble his arrival was. He entered the world not in a grand palace or a fancy room, but in a quiet space where animals rested. This fits perfectly with the kind of life Jesus would later live, a life of humility, gentleness, and closeness to ordinary people. Long before any of this happened, the prophet Micah had written a message from God. "But you, Bethlehem, out of you will come one who will be ruler over Israel." Imagine that. Hundreds of years before Jesus was born, the scriptures pointed to Bethlehem. People who studied the scriptures understood this prophecy. That is why Herod's priests told the Magi that Bethlehem was the place they should look. The prophecy was like a signpost pointing toward the little town. Now, let's look at what history tells us. Historians who carefully study old documents and evidence have explored the world Jesus lived in. They know that the Roman Empire often ordered censuses. There are records from ancient Egypt, also under Roman rule, showing that people were sometimes required to return to their hometowns. This supports what Luke described. Archaeologists, the scientists who study ancient objects and buildings, have also explored Bethlehem. They discovered that Bethlehem existed during the time of Jesus, with stone houses, caves used for sheltering animals, and tools used by families who lived there. All these findings help us understand that the setting described in the Bible matches the real world of that time. But what about people who lived close to the time of Jesus? Did they believe he was born in Bethlehem? The answer is yes. Christians who lived only a few decades after Jesus were convinced of his Bethlehem birth. One of these early writers was Justin Martyr, who lived around 150 AD. He wrote about the cave where Jesus was believed to have been born. Later, that cave became part of the Church of the Nativity, which still stands today and is one of the oldest and most respected churches in the world. It would have been very hard for early Christians to convince people of a fake birthplace when many local families had lived in the area for generations. The fact that Bethlehem was accepted so early and so strongly supports the truth of the story. Even with all this evidence, some people today still wonder whether the story of Jesus' birth in Bethlehem was added just to match the prophecy. But when we look closely, we see that Matthew and Luke give different details. If the story had been invented, the writers probably would have made their versions exactly the same. Instead, their differences feel natural, like two people describing the same event from two angles. Some also wonder why Jesus, who grew up in Nazareth, wasn't born there. But this is exactly what Luke explains. The census forced Joseph and Mary to travel. This actually makes the story more believable, not less. And if someone wanted to make up a grand birthplace for a hero, they wouldn't choose a tiny, simple town like Bethlehem. They would pick a large, impressive city. The fact that the story points to a humble place makes it feel more honest. Another fascinating part of the story is the star that guided the wise men. Throughout history, people have tried to understand what this star might have been. Some scientists think it could have been a planetary alignment where two bright planets appear very close together in the sky, shining like a single brilliant light. Others think it could have been a comet, which sometimes appears suddenly and shines brightly. Still others believe it may have been a supernova, a massive exploding star. Ancient records from China and Babylon show that unusual lights appeared in the sky around the time Jesus was born. This suggests that the Star of Bethlehem may have been connected to a real astronomical event that caught the attention of the Magi. When we piece everything together, the biblical accounts, the ancient prophecies, the historical evidence, the archaeological discoveries, and the testimony of early Christians, we find that the story fits together beautifully. Jesus being born in Bethlehem isn't just a detail in a Christmas tale. It connects him to the promises God made long before his birth. It shows that God uses humble places and humble people to carry out his greatest plans. So when we ask the question, was Jesus really born in Bethlehem? We find that many different kinds of evidence all point in the same direction. The most reasonable and well-supported answer is yes. Jesus' birth in Bethlehem ties together history, faith, prophecy, and the lives of real people who lived long ago. It also reminds us of something truly important. God chose a small, quiet town, not a castle or palace, for the most important birth in history. And as Christians today, this truth carries a message for us. If the King of Kings entered the world in a humble place like Bethlehem, then we are reminded that God values humility, kindness, and a willing heart. We don't have to be important or powerful for God to use us. Instead, we can share his love in simple ways, in our homes, our schools, our friendships, and our communities, trusting that God can do amazing things through ordinary people who choose to follow him.